The FBI arrested him this morning.
The biggest investment fraud in Wall Street history.
The largest financial scam.
Wall Street fraud who masterminded the largest.
It seems almost impossible.
Money manager Bernard Madoff behind bars at this hour after pleading.
In the world of finance, trust is everything. This man built his empire on it. For decades, he was a symbol of success, a trusted advisor to the elite, and a pioneer of market innovation. But behind the polished image was the most elaborate Ponzi scheme the world had ever seen. $65 billion vanished into thin air. This is the story of deception, greed, and the collapse of a financial empire. In 1960, Bernard Lawrence Madoff founded the Bernard Lawrence Madoff Investment Securities LLC as a broker-dealer for penny stock with $5,000, which is equivalent to $53,660 in 2025 that he earned from working as a lifeguard and irrigation sprinkler installer, and a loan of $50,000 from his father-in-law, accountant Saul Alpern, who referred a circle of friends and their families. Carl Shapiro was one such early customer, investing $100,000. Initially, the firm made markets. They quoted bid and ask prices via the National Quotation Bureau's pink sheets. In order to compete with firms that were members of the New York Stock Exchange trading on the stock exchange's floor, his firm began using innovative computer information technology to disseminate its quotes. After a trial run, the technology that the firm helped to develop became the National Association of Securities Dealers Automated Quotation Stock Market, popularly referred to as Nasdaq. After 41 years as a sole proprietorship, the Madoff firm incorporated in 2001 as a limited liability company, with Madoff as the sole shareholder. The firm functioned as a third market trading provider, bypassing exchange specialist firms by directly executing orders over the counter from retail brokers. In 2008, the firm was the sixth largest market maker in S&P 500 stocks. Bernard Madoff was the first prominent practitioner of payment for order flow, in which a dealer pays a broker for the right to execute a customer's order. Some academics questioned the ethics of these payments, but Madoff argued that these payments did not alter the price that the customer received. He viewed the payments as a normal business practice. Several family members worked for Madoff. Madoff was married to Ruth Alpern. They had two sons, Mark, a 1986 graduate of the University of Michigan, and Andrew, a 1988 graduate of University of Pennsylvania's Wharton Business School. Both sons later worked in the trading section. Madoff's younger brother, Peter, an attorney, was senior managing director and chief compliance officer, and Peter's daughter, Shanna Madoff, also an attorney, was the firm's compliance attorney. Over the years, Madoff's sons had borrowed money from their parents to purchase homes and other property. Both sons used outside investment firms to run their own private philanthropic foundations. In March 2003, Andrew Madoff was diagnosed with mantle cell lymphoma and eventually returned to work. He was named chairman of the Lymphoma Research Foundation. In 2009, Madoff and his wife were worth up to $126 million, plus an estimated $700 million for the value of his business interest in Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, LLC. Madoff's name first came up in a fraud investigation in 1992, when two people complained to the SEC about investments they made with Frank Avellino and Michael Bienies, the successor to his father-in-law's accounting practice. For years, Ruth and two of his colleagues, Frank Avellino and Michael Bienies, had raised money for Madoff, a practice that continued after Avellino and Bienies took over the firm in the 1970s. Avellino returned the money to investors, and the SEC closed the case. In 1999, financial analyst Harry Markopolos had informed the SEC that he believed it was legally and mathematically impossible to achieve the gains Madoff claimed to deliver. According to Markopolos, it took him 4 minutes to conclude that Madoff's numbers did not add up, and another minute to suspect they were fraudulent. Harry Markopolos discovered that in order for Madoff's strategy to be possible, he would have had to buy more options on the Chicago Board Options Exchange than actually existed. He was ignored by the SEC's Boston office in 2000 and 2001, as well as by Megan Chung at the SEC's New York office in 2005 and 2007, when he presented further evidence. Bernard Madoff told his son Mark Madoff on December 9th that he planned to pay out $173 million in bonuses 2 months early. Madoff said that he had recently made profits through business operations, and that now was a good time to distribute it. Mark told his brother Andrew, and the next morning they went to their father's office and asked him how he could pay bonuses to his staff if he was having trouble paying clients. They then traveled to Madoff's apartment, where, with Ruth Madoff nearby, Madoff told them that he was struggling to meet $7 billion in redemptions. He told longtime assistant Frank DePascali, who had overseen the fraudulent advisory business, on December 3rd that he was finished, and on December 9th, Madoff told his sons that he was finished, that he had absolutely nothing left, and that his investment fund was just one big lie, and basically a giant Ponzi scheme. Madoff had intended to wind up his operations over the remainder of the week. He directed DePascali to use the remaining money in his business account to cash out the accounts of several family members and favored friends. However, as soon as the sons left their father's apartment, Mark and Andrew immediately contacted a lawyer, who in turn got them in touch with federal prosecutors and the SEC. On December 11, 2008, Madoff was arrested and charged with securities fraud. After Madoff's arrest, the SEC was criticized for its lack of financial expertise and lack of due diligence, despite having received complaints from Harry Markopolos and others for almost a decade. The SEC's Inspector General, Kotz, found that since 1992, there had been 6 investigations of Madoff by the SEC, which were botched either through incompetent staff work or by neglecting allegations of financial experts and whistleblowers. At least some of the SEC investigators doubted whether Madoff was even trading. Madoff posted $10 million bail in December 2008 and remained under 24-hour monitoring and house arrest in his Upper East Side penthouse apartment until his guilty plea on March 12, 2009. Here's the catch. For years, Madoff had simply deposited investors' money in his business account at JP Morgan Chase and withdrew money from that account when they requested redemptions. He had scraped together just enough money to make a redemption payment on November 19th. However, despite cash infusions from several longtime investors, by the week after Thanksgiving, it was apparent that there was not enough money to even begin to meet the remaining requests. His Chase account had over $5.5 billion in mid-2008, but by late November was down to $234 million, not even a fraction of the outstanding redemptions. With banks having all stopped lending, Madoff knew he could not even begin to borrow the money he needed. According to an SEC indictment, office workers Annette Bongiorno and Joanne Krupe created false trading reports based on the returns that Madoff ordered for each customer. For example, when Madoff determined a customer's return, one of the back office workers would enter a false trade report with a previous date and then enter a false closing trade in the amount required to produce the required profit, according to the indictment. On a daily basis, DePascali and his team on the 17th floor of the Lipstick Building, where the scam was based, watched the closing price of the S&P 100. They then picked the best-performing stocks and used them to create bogus baskets of stocks as the basis for false trading records. They frequently made their trades at a stock's monthly high or low, resulting in the high returns that they touted to customers. Over the years, Madoff admonished his investors to keep quiet about their relationship with him. This was because he was well aware of the finite limits that existed for a legitimate split-strike conversion. He knew that if the amount he managed became known, investors would question whether he could trade on the scale he claimed without the market reacting to his activity, or whether there were enough options to hedge his stock purchases. Madoff targeted wealthy American Jewish communities, using his in-group status to obtain investments from Jewish individuals and institutions like the Hadassah, the Women's Zionist Organization of America, and the Elie Wiesel Foundation. Jewish federations and hospitals lost millions of dollars, forcing some organizations to close. The Lapin Foundation, for instance, was forced to close temporarily because it had invested its funds with Madoff. Madoff admitted during his March 2009 guilty plea that the essence of his scheme was to deposit client money into a bank account rather than invest it and generate steady returns, as clients had believed. When clients wanted their money, I used the money in the Chase Manhattan bank account that belonged to them or other clients to pay the requested funds, he told the court. He was committed to satisfying his clients' expectations of high returns despite an economic recession. He admitted to false trading activities masked by foreign transfers and false SEC filings. He stated that he always intended to resume legitimate trading activity, but it proved difficult and ultimately impossible to reconcile his client accounts. In the end, he said, he realized that his scam would eventually be exposed. Madoff maintained that he began his fraud in the early 1990s, though prosecutors believed it was underway as early as the 1980s. DePascali, for instance, told prosecutors that he knew at some point in the late 1980s or early 1990s that the investment advisory business was a sham. Madoff pleaded pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies, including securities fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, making false statements, perjury, theft from an employee benefit plan, and making false filings with the SEC. The plea was the response to a criminal complaint filed 2 days earlier, which stated that over the past 20 years, Madoff had defrauded his clients of almost $65 billion in the largest Ponzi scheme in history. Madoff insisted he was solely responsible for the fraud. He pleaded guilty to all charges without a plea bargain. It has been speculated that he did this instead of cooperating with the authorities in order to avoid naming any associates and co-conspirators in the scheme. On June 26, 2009, Chin ordered forfeiture of $170 million in Madoff's assets. Prosecutors asked Chin to sentence Madoff to 150 years in prison. In settlement with federal prosecutors, Madoff's wife, Ruth, agreed to forfeit her claim to $85 million in assets, leaving her with $2.5 million in cash. The order allowed the SEC and court-appointed trustee Irving Picard to pursue Ruth Madoff's funds. Picard sued Madoff's sons, Mark and Andrew, his brother Peter and Peter's daughter Shauna, for negligence and breach of fiduciary duty for $198 million. David Sheehan, chief counsel to trustee Picard, stated on September 27, 2009, that about $36 billion was invested into the scam, returning $18 billion to investors, with $18 billion missing. About half of Madoff's investors were net winners, earning more than their investment. The withdrawal amounts in the final 6 years were subject to clawback lawsuits, which simply means return of money. In a May 4, 2011 statement, Trustee Picard said that the total amount owed to customers was $57 billion, of which $17.3 billion was actually invested by customers. $7.6 billion has been recovered, but pending lawsuits. Only $2.6 billion was available to repay victims. The size of the fraud was stated as $65 billion early in the investigation. Jeffrey Picower, rather than Madoff, appears to have been the largest beneficiary of Madoff's Ponzi scheme, and his estate settled the claims against it for $7.2 billion. On November 9, 2017, the U.S. government announced that it would begin paying out $772.5 million from the Madoff Victim Fund to more than 24,000 victims of the Ponzi scheme. The Madoff Recovery Initiative reported $14.418 billion in total recoveries and settlement agreements. On June 29, 2009, Judge Chin sentenced Bernard Madoff to the maximum sentence of 150 years in federal prison. His lawyers initially asked the judge to impose a sentence of 7 years, and later requested that the sentence be 12 years because of Madoff's advanced age of 71 and his limited life expectancy. Madoff apologized to his victims, saying, "I have left a legacy of shame, as some of my victims have pointed out, to my family and my grandchildren. This was something I will live in for the rest of my life. I'm sorry, I know that doesn't help you." Judge Chin had not received any mitigating factor letters from friends or family testifying to Madoff's good deeds. The absence of such support was telling, he said. Ruth did not attend court, but issued a statement saying, "I am breaking my silence now because my reluctance to speak has been interpreted as indifference or lack of sympathy for the victims of my husband Bernie's crime, which was exactly the opposite of the truth. I'm embarrassed and ashamed. Like everyone else, I feel betrayed and confused. The man who committed this horrible fraud was not the man whom I have known for all these years." In November 2009, David G. Freeling, Madoff's accounting frontman and auditor, pleaded guilty to securities fraud, investment advisor fraud, making false filings to the SEC, and obstructing the Internal Revenue Service. He admitted to merely rubber-stamping Madoff's filings rather than auditing them. Freeling extensively cooperated with federal prosecutors and testified at the trials of 5 former Madoff employees, all of whom were convicted and sentenced to between 2.5 and 10 years in prison. Although he could have been sentenced to more than 100 years in prison because of his cooperation, Freeling was sentenced in May 2015 to 1 year of home detention and 1 year of supervised release. Madoff's right-hand man and financial chief, Frank DePascali, pleaded guilty to 10 federal charges in 2009 and also testified for the government at the trial of 5 former colleagues, all of whom were convicted. DePascali faced a sentence of up to 125 years, but he died of lung cancer in May 2015 before he could be sentenced. Madoff's brother, Peter, was also sentenced to 10 years in prison in 2012. Madoff was transferred to the Federal Correctional Institution Butner, a federal prison for inmates with special health needs near Butner, North Carolina. Madoff's projected release date was January 31, 2137. The release date, described as academic in Madoff's case because he would have to live to the age of 198, reflects a reduction for good behavior. On October 13, 2009, it was reported that Madoff experienced his first prison yard fight with another inmate, also a senior citizen. When he began his sentence, Madoff's stress levels were so severe that he broke out in hives and other skin maladies soon after. On December 18, 2009, Madoff was moved to Duke University Medical Center in Durham, North Carolina, and was treated for several facial injuries. News reports described Madoff's injuries as more serious, and including facial fractures, broken ribs, and a collapsed lung. The Federal Bureau of Prisons said Madoff signed an affidavit on December 24, 2009, which indicated that he had not been assaulted and that he had been admitted to the hospital for hypertension. In his letter to his daughter-in-law, Madoff said that he was being treated in prison like a mafia don. "They call me either Uncle Bernie or Mr. Madoff. I can't walk anywhere without someone shouting their greetings and encouragement to keep my spirit up. It's really quite sweet how concerned everyone was about my well-being, and including the staff. It's much safer here than walking the streets of New York." On July 29, 2019, Madoff asked Donald Trump for a reduced sentence or pardon, to which the White House and Donald Trump made no comment. On the morning of December 11, 2010, exactly 2 years after Bernard's arrest, his son Mark was found dead in his New York City apartment. Andrew, Madoff's other son, died of lymphoma on September 3, 2014. On February 17, 2022, Madoff's sister, Sandra Weiner, and her husband, Marvin, were both found dead with gun wounds in their Boynton Beach, Florida home. Madoff died on April 14, 2021 of hypertension, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, and chronic kidney disease at the age of 82 in Federal Medical Center, Butner. He was cremated in Durham, North Carolina.